Hello and welcome to episode 58 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Dark. I am a gardener and I do the gardening, but I am also a podcaster and I do the podcasting. And you are listening to the podcasting part of my life in which I talk about the gardening part. This week I am finishing up planting the woodland garden and I'm getting very excited about it. I'm talking a bit about the plants that I use, and then I'm having a tidy up, getting the garden ready for its first big party of the season. There's also a little reading from a piece that I wrote back in 2011. I also visited the Chelsea Flower Show this week, but I think you've probably heard enough about the Chelsea Flower Show, so I will save you from that particular rehashing. If anyone would like to know my in-depth thoughts, then they can, of course, email me on thegardenlogpodcast@gmail.com and I will send you a slapdash breakdown of what I saw. But enough soliciting for correspondence. Let's get on with the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening. A week in late May that began hot. It was, if you want to anchor this to your social calendar, the first day of Chelsea on Monday. That's the day with the press tickets and the celebrities and the oversized hats and bottles of fizz. And thank goodness it was hot, because you look very silly standing around in an oversized sombrero drinking from a flute of bubbles if the rain is blowing in sideways from the river and bits of garden are going shredding off. Thankfully the sun came out to save the celebrities from looking foolish, and also to save me from looking foolish, far more importantly, because I was down completing my woodland garden. And completing a woodland garden on an overcast day feels silly, because the people who come to admire it and say, "Ooh, isn't that wonderful? Look what you've done with all our money," can't appreciate the need sometimes to take refuge, to hide in subtle, shaded corners of the garden. But with the sun out there blaring and burning and beating down, suddenly you can see the point of this thing that I have been banging my fists and my feet into for the past fortnight. On Monday I started by setting out the plants in their final positions, and these plants have been set out a few times before to give me preliminary sketches of the thing. There's been some dry runs, some dress rehearsals, but this time was the final setting out in place where they would be planted. And it was good fun. I've got some really nice structural ferns, some that I haven't used before, which is really nice. But particularly this fern called Matitusia strumphiopteris, which is a great. Sorry, I think I pronounced that wrong. Matitusia struthiopteris, and the cultivar is called the King, which I hadn't come across before. My colleague bought it. It's a very big shuttlecock fern. They say on the plant description that it's vase shape, but I certainly wouldn't have a vase so shaped in my house. I prefer my vases to taper in at the top. This one carries on going up and flicks out, and it has these fantastic fronds that dry upright in place and are held for the remaining year. So this year's fern has these wonderful upright fronds, probably almost a metre, 75 centimetres I'd say at the moment, and then it has these very striking dried fronds from last year that look like the skeleton of a large wooden fish has been glued onto the fern's base. It's very effective. We've got a couple of those in the way. And then because the path snakes a little bit, They need to be, there needs to be big things to block people from cutting off the corners of the snake, as it were, to make them follow the woodland path. So they're going along there, along with some other ferns. And there are other exciting things knocking about in there. We planted some sanguinaria, which is that Canadian plant, Sanguinaria canadensis, which is called the bloodroot. I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast before. When you scratch the root, it looks exactly as if you have sliced the top layer of someone's finger. And you get a moment of staring in horror at the flesh before beads of blood well up to take their place. I've been growing the single-flowered version, Sanguinaria canadensis, the species, but this is a cultivar. It's the multiplex form, which is a flora plena, and it's a double flower, and it's much, much more striking. You can actually see the flower from across the garden, this water lily type flower, rather than in the normal form where it's a dainty little candle tip of white. So that's quite an exciting plant and a new one for the garden. And then there's lots of geraniums. I mentioned last week there's geranium nodosum, which is that incredibly good dry shade geranium that people confuse for ground elder, because it's got very strange strappy leaves and it just grows where nothing should be growing. And then the other geranium, we've got a lot of geranium sylvaticum album, which is the white form with the very bright leaves and the erect flowers held up high, dainty little things. And hopefully in a few years' time, it'll take a while, things will grow slowly down there in the shade, that will form great blocks and swathes of green. I've got a secondary path in there as well, built from huge York stone slabs with slightly rounded edges, and I'm hoping that it will creep all through those, so you almost have to force your way through these when you take the stepping stone path to go exploring deeper into the woodland garden. So that's looking very nice. There's some good forms of epimedium gone in there as well, and lots of hostas towards the edge of the wood. I'm really pleased with. I'm really pleased how it's worked out. I've gone for a sort of pink and green look. So classic bright green hosta, no glaucousness, no mottling, no variegation at all, just hosta green, like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle from the 80s, not a rebooted, slightly dark character, but a bright radiation green kind of hosta. And then the pink of a big Cornus cusa, which flowers obviously pink, and then slowly fades to a whitish bract around that little cluster of nascent berries that we have at the moment. And then at the bottom, as the ground cover, lots and lots of a pink-flowered London Pride. And London Pride is a plant that I haven't used on a large scale before. Normally you find it in a garden that you have inherited, or you've just started on your first day on the job, and there's 14 or 15 London Prides that have scuttled under a bush, like a flock of ducklings bereft of mother. But en masse, on the edge of shady areas, there's nothing really better, and that goes around the path, and I'm hoping that pink thrown up against the hosta will look quite exciting. And then with the cornice above it doing another thing, and then on the other side of the path I've also put some other pink. I put some Pimpinella major rosea, which is that wonderful umbellifer. It's quite thick and strong and small. The head is dense and fairly bright pink. From a distance you could be forgiven for thinking it was a pink achillea or something. Then you get closer and realise actually no, this is something more exciting altogether. And that really ties in with those other shades around there. And then I've wiggled some more bits of green in between there as well. There's a few Vinca minors, and then there's other accent plants in white. Some things like the big white Aquilegia, whose name I've forgotten. You'll all have planted it at some point, I'm sure. It's that completely reliable one that you can guarantee will come out tall, chest height to a child, in a beautiful white shade. So that can go deeper and darker into the wood. And setting those out took all of Monday. And then on Tuesday, I planted. The outside was heating rapidly, but it stayed cool in the woodland. And I watered as I went along. Each time something was planted in the ground, I gave it a really good soaking. So the area was suffused with that damp, mushroomy woodland smell. The day got brighter and clearer, not a cloud in the sky, which kind of gives you the impression of being in a tent under the canopy of beech leaves. Outside, everything is robbed of its colour, almost by the bright sun, and it just becomes backdrop of bright, and inside everything is given an extra clarity and quality by the shade, by the greenish light that comes from above. The white aquilegias look like they have been dipped in grass juice, and the greens take on slightly different tones. I've planted quite a few Acer dissectum, just the classic green Acer, and the top of them looks almost greener than the bottom because you have green light falling on them from above. So you're given extra tones, and everything up close that you're working on is a part of your world. It's almost like a foreground in a painting, and everything out there in the brash, bright, herbaceous border, sunshine baked bit of the garden almost doesn't exist. It was good fun to lose myself in that planting. A hard day, but a very good day. I carried on hacking through and building up stacks and stacks and stacks of flower pots until it was gone. The day was finished and it was time to go home. On Wednesday, I finished the planting. You'll be pleased to hear. It was very satisfying. I finished about 1 o'clock and tidied up, neatened the edges, blew things off, watered things out, and was finally able to unroll the matting that I'd put down on the path to protect it from all of the soil and compost that I was spraying around, which is very, very, very satisfying. It's like when you see someone doing stencil art and they're just spraying, and you can't really see what's going on because obviously they've sprayed a whole block of wool, whatever colour they're doing, fluoro orange, and then they peel off the stencil and you see only the image left on the wall, rolling back this matting, and suddenly the garden was complete in a second. I think it is wonderful, the stone path going through between the tall wooden pillars. My colleague thinks it's far too garish. But this is Chelsea Flower Show week, and we need the garish yin to go with the classy yang. And to prove that, we went off to Chelsea in the afternoon to have a little look around what was going on in that little part of southwest London. Thursday is my day of learning, where I normally go and do the master's course, but I sacrificed it for the garden this week because we were on tight deadlines. The end of the week was the big party, and the woodland had chronically overrun. I had been down in the shade, waxing lyrical about tones of shadow and moving around pimpernellas and moving them back and swapping them with London Pride for far, far too long, while others manfully soldiered on doing the actual bare bones business of keeping a garden looking nice and alive. So Thursday was a day of frantic catching up, of potting up urns and tubs and planters to give them their day out finery. If the garden were a bride about to be given away, then I was the nervous and fussy hairdresser called in to drink a glass of Bucks Fizz and put some curlers in. We moved the very last of the tender overwintered stuff out of the greenhouse and stuck it in the borders. There are only a few canners knocking around in the back there, so they've gone in. We shoved a load more annuals into the gaps, the things that we've been growing, the nicotianas and others. We did a last minute balancing of one of the borders. We've got this border that hasn't really had much done to it. Last year I grew vast quantities of sweet peas in it. And again, the sweet peas are going up this time without their horrendous scaffolding structure. This year it's a much more tasteful setup with hessian netting and home-cut birch poles and happy little sweet peas scrambling away like little vegan darlings. It's all much more natural. But there are vast amounts of self-seeded plants from last year, particularly the California poppy. And with the California poppy, it almost looks like our own version of the Californian super bloom. It is a horrendous orange sight. I'm sure the super bloom looked absolutely divine when you were out on the hills above Santa Fe. But in an English garden full of statuary and herbaceous plantings and pink peonies, having this mass of orange flowers looks slightly odd. So we went in there and did the horticultural equivalent of firefighting, when you send 15 engines in to douse an area of heat. We cooled in the blue to balance the orange, put in a load of domes of campanula straight from the trolley from Holland to pull it down a bit. Some agapanthus, which isn't out yet but has got cooling, strappy leaves to put a bit of green in there, because the California poppy, as you'll know, doesn't have a lush green leaf. It has a nice silvery, feathery leaf that adds to the feeling of heat. So he tried to get a bit more calming greens in there, and just almost rein this bit of the garden back. I'm lucky in that the clients I work for are completely out of control and crazy for colour, and there was no way that they would complain about things being too bright. But it irked me seeing it, knowing that it wasn't quite right. And I think we got it just about under control. The urns have got lots of tumbling lobelias, the Cambridge blue, which is quite a subtle one that we grew from seed this year. So hopefully when they come into flower, that will also add to the effect. There's also a lot of cosmos gonna come up in there in tones of yellow and white, which might fan the flames or might cool things down. Who knows? It's quite exciting to see this border develop. It's not long for this world. It fronts a piece of hoarding around a site that's being completely redeveloped. So it's only really got one season left in it. So we might as well send it off raging against the dying of the light. One day it will be lawn again, and God, it will remember the time when it was a super bloom. And then it was Friday, which was a day almost exclusively devoted to running around doing all of the things that I had forgotten to do. Some of them were not particularly glamorous. There are a lot of birds nesting in trees above the paths. That requires pressure washing solutions. There were random trays scattered about the place where ideas had half formed in my head of putting things down and getting something into the ground, and then I had been called away to do something else. So I swept round the garden, planting those. At about 3 o'clock, it was remembered that no one had marked out the volleyball court, and you can't have a garden party without somewhere to play volleyball, so that had to be done. The croquet lawns had to be given a final cut and primp. I think at one stage there were 6 of us running around doing various garden-related things in all different directions, and it really does foster a sense of camaraderie, this drive to completion. I am a huge fan of the dawdle and of slow gardening, of contemplation and thinking and staring at things for 5 minutes before making up my mind. But sometimes you need the extra energy, the extra boost and motivation that comes from being part of a big team getting things done. It leads to a faster burning sense of elation. It's like depressants and stimulants. Various people have different tastes about which they prefer to get addicted to, but we can recognise that both are addictive, and obviously therefore both have their moments. And sometimes after a long time on the depressants, it's nice to get a little hit of something invigorating and innovating. We got everything done. The garden looked absolutely magnificent. Really was wonderful to close the gate knowing that it was in its best state and go home happy. A week where a lot had been accomplished. The beauty did not go unnoticed and the gardeners received their due. Here's to letting it all slide over the next fortnight or so. No real recommendations this week, just a little bit of self-indulgence. I've been going through posts on my old blog, which I'm surprised to see still exists out there on the internet. It's at bensgarden.wordpress.com. And I found a post from July 2011 when I was talking about gardening on television. And I was complaining a little bit, but also making some helpful suggestions. And this week, when we had wall-to-wall coverage of the Chelsea Flower Show, with people standing in gardens, explaining them all from different angles, I thought that maybe everyone would benefit from hearing this blog post read out loud. It's called Dear Channels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it goes something like this. This week, I've been thinking unusually hard, and I've come to a rather controversial conclusion. Gardening television. It's not actually that bad. Yes, it's pretty dire and boring, but so is most television. No, I've worked out that the real problem with horticultural TV is not its content, but its paucity. If we had 10 times more bad gardening programs on our televisions, I'm sure that we could all find something crap that still perversely appealed to us, like with cookery shows. And even if we didn't find something exactly to our taste, we would all have watched a different program on Friday night, so we'd be spared Saturday's collective critical dismemberment of Gardener's World. That's why I'm dedicating this blog post to the 5 major television channels. I have developed concepts, copyright Ben Dark 2011, for 5 new television programs that I think will appeal to a wide audience. You guys can work out who gets what, but I'd like to see them in production by the autumn. Hopefully next spring you'll have got them on the air and I can avoid another summer of listening to understimulated gardeners moaning on about Don and Titchmarsh and them being no Jeff Hamilton. Number 1. Plant Perspectives. A gardening program filmed and narrated each week entirely from the perspective of one plant in our Midlands garden. Each week a different flower gives its unique take on the gardening season, from seed packet to compost heap. Number 2. Paradise Found. A fly-on-the-wall series following the trials and tribulations of one upper-class eccentric as he replants his garden to form a living and unabridged version of Milton's classic blank verse poem, Paradise Lost. Do you like some narrative in your gardens? Are you desperate for garden to be seen as highbrow art? Then rejoice as Anthony Gormanshaw creates the Tartarus of Begonia. Number 3. Garden Wars! A game show in which 2 middle-aged gardeners compete over the garden fence. The first driven to sell up loses. Expect rows, deliberately offensive bedding, malicious tree preservation orders, accidental herbicide drift, sun-blocking, husband-swapping and malicious gossip down the post office. Number 4. What went wrong? A group of all-star garden pundits provide post-season analysis on the nation's gardens and interview gardeners as they head back to their huts. At the end of the day, it was a year of 2 halves, Alan, and we might not have created many opportunities for flowers, but at the end of the day, we avoided overfeeding the lawn. Number 5. Gardeners' Question Time. Real gardeners answer questions from their irate clients. This week, am I paying you to sit in the van and smoke rollies? And didn't we agree you'd be here 3 hours ago? And why have you pulled up all the foxgloves? So there you go, my recommendation. A very ancient piece of writing by me, Ben Dark. And you will be disappointed to hear that none of those programs were picked up for production. They remain there on the internet, sitting around. There are many other things sitting around on bensgarden.wordpress.com. You can go in there and find out for yourself all sorts of fantastic nonsense from 2009 onwards. So have fun, and I will see you back here next week for more spoken horticulture. I hope you have a wonderful time out there in the green beyond, whether you are gardening or doing something altogether more disreputable. Thank you very much, and goodbye.